Hello and welcome to the Healthcare Today podcast. Recorded live at Health Europe in Amsterdam, today we're asking, what if the best time for health tech founders to plan an exit is before they think they're even ready? Sari Kaganoff is the CEO and founder of Aytza, where she helps health tech companies navigate new markets, commercialization, and M&A using expert advisors and proprietary AI. She previously led Rock House consulting practice and spent 7 years at McKinsey. In this episode, we're talking about how to set your company up for a successful exit and why thinking about M&A as a growth strategy changes everything. So you've advised dozens of health tech companies from the inside during your time with McKinsey and Rock Health and now through Aytza. What's the single biggest misconception that founders have about what makes a company acquisitions ready?
I think a lot of times companies think that they've built so much interesting technology, they often overvalue that in an acquisition. So they say, oh, I built this awesome tech and people should want that tech. When the acquirers often are looking at other things, they're either looking at potentially revenue, they're looking at maybe capabilities, customers, and they're not necessarily valuing the pure tech as much as the selling company does. And so that can sometimes be a surprise for folks.
Founders often treat an exit as kind of a distant event. You set up your baby, you don't even think about wanting to get rid of it at some point in the future. It's parenting, I guess. What's the one thing a Series A health tech CEO should really be doing today that directly increases their future exit value?
Well, number one, you should always know who could buy you. And you should always have a relationship with those people already. Because the last thing you want is to say, oh, actually, now I'm ready to get sold. And then you start figuring out the strategy. So even though it's not something you may want to do, you should always create that optionality and think about who are the right potential fit partners who might be good acquisition targets. And can I start that relationship building now so that when the minute comes that you're maybe ready to consider it, then you have that in place already, because it can take years. It can take a lot of relationship building to make it happen. And if you come at it late in the game, you're going to be left with a non-ideal situation in terms of your optionality.
Let's talk a little bit about M&A as a growth strategy, not just an end game. How can a founder use small acquisitions to become more attractive to a future buyer?
So if you think about M&A, it's essentially a shortcut to a broader product offering. There's a lot of different reasons you might do M&A, but it could be you're getting an adjacent capability. It could be you're getting a new geography. Maybe you're getting more AI native tooling than what you had before. And so if you think about all the time and effort it took to build up what you have today, are there areas where you can make a tuck in that just immediately adds that? Actually, in my podcast, CEO Pajama Time, I actually this week will release a podcast episode with Dimitri Karagas, who's one of the co-founders of 30 Madison. And they actually made a couple of acquisitions he talks about on the podcast, including Neurex and then Pill Club, which actually essentially made them more valuable to the acquirer. They ended up exiting to RemedyMed. So those two earlier acquisitions helped drive their exit and essentially to be acquired as well. And so we definitely see that building out the capabilities and offerings that you have via acquisition can be a strategy to help you scale and then eventually potentially also exit.
Now, many founders see M&A as something that just happens and they don't plan for it, but you've helped companies use M&A as a growth strategy before they themselves are acquired. Can you think of an example of where that strategy really works in health tech in particular?
I think the important thing to think about, like I said, is really planning in advance for who might be a good acquisition target for you, but also whom maybe would you want to acquire. And so keeping those in mind and planning those out have really helped companies move more quickly to get to scale and also eventually exit. A good example of this would be, again, on the podcast when I was talking to Glenn Tolman, the CEO of Transcarent, he talked about acquiring Accolade as a way to gain more customers, which they then could re-platform that company onto their own Transcarent platform. And so I think there's a lot of optionality you want to keep in mind. And I've talked to founders who have been considering, an investment, and then they decide that actually one of these companies that they may get an investment from, they're better off being sold to. And I've seen companies talk about partnerships and then decide that it's better to buy the thing, right? So it can work in different ways. It's almost like a chessboard, and there's a strategic consideration to either being bought or to buying that you always want to have on the table as you're considering channel partners, as you're considering investment, as you're considering exit.
How should a founder think about strategic fit when acquiring another company or asset versus when they're positioning themselves to be acquired?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to think about strategic fit. The first thing to think about is that there's different flavors of acquirers. And actually, we have an upcoming publication that we're going to be publishing that talks about health tech M&A. And what we see are there's really three main bodies of acquirers. The first one being other health tech companies, and it's close to 50% of the acquisitions in health tech in the last year or so have been other health tech companies. The second category is what we call incumbents. So healthcare companies, med device companies, pharma companies, diagnostics companies, and that's about 40% of the acquisitions. And then the next category is investors, so PE, and that's in around the 5% range. And then you have also tech companies buying, and then kind of a smattering of others. So each of those companies is actually looking for a different sort of asset or a different type of strategic goal. And so oftentimes the health tech companies, the kind of peer companies, they're looking for someone to either help them scale more quickly by getting an adjacent capability. And when we analyzed this, we saw about 50% of acquisitions were looking to kind of expand capability set. Sometimes they're looking for a new market to enter, a geography that they don't have. Sometimes they're looking for a new type of therapeutic area they may not be in, or other things like that. On the other hand, when the incumbents are looking for technologies to acquire or companies to acquire, they're oftentimes looking to either internalize something that they've been using as a vendor. So they may have been working with a company and now they want that capability in-house, or maybe they're acquiring something that they don't have the technology for. So they may have like done something in an old school way, and now they're going to buy an AI capability. About 15% of the acquisitions by incumbents were stating that it was for an AI enablement or capability purpose. So we see that there are those things, but then you also see that like the PE companies, they're looking much more for like a structural business that they can improve the operations of and just make it a better business. And so they're looking more at like revenue and EBITDA and other things. And so the way you position yourself as a company and sort of the relationships you seek will differ based on who you think is a good acquisition partner for you. Especially when you're looking to exit, you want to think about, is there an incumbent that makes sense to buy me? Therefore, what would they want? Is there a peer company or some adjacent startup that may want to buy me? Or is this more of like a financial play that I'll exit to a PE? And then that will orient both the relationships you build, but also how you think about your company capabilities, how you set up your company for success, how you plan that exit, even how you market yourself might vary depending on those things. And so making sure you have a clear-eyed view of which is the right path, or maybe multiple you can be thinking about, but then understanding what they care about and making sure you're orienting your company in that direction.
When you're running your business, you'll just survive day by day. You would think, how do we make this grow? You don't necessarily have the time to think about that exit strategy and who you should be aiming for.
So what I think is, as a CEO, your job is to work in the business and on the business at the same time. And it's difficult to do that. In the business is sort of a day-to-day run the business, deliver for the customers, et cetera, product building. But then on the business is thinking about these bigger strategic questions. And I think you sort of have to carve that work stream. And I've talked to a lot of folks who've done it in different ways. Sometimes it's like carve a block on Sunday morning when things are quiet and people aren't hammering at your door about things. Some people do it like on a monthly basis. Some people do it in the run up to their board meetings where they carve a section for strategic thinking and use that as a forcing mechanism to make them think about these things. But that's honestly the challenge of any founder, is that short-term to long-term prioritization and always making sure you are keeping the longer-term opportunities as like one of your work streams on your to-do list, making sure you have that. It can also help to have certain advisors or other people that you work with on those longer term picture things, and even scheduling time with them will force you to prepare and think about it. Some folks do journaling as a way to do this, but it's really sort of reminding yourself that one of your jobs is always to plan for that future and carving that time in whatever way works for you to make sure you do that.
Aytza uses AI and healthcare data to guide these decisions. Where does AI genuinely help with exit planning in particular, and where would you say it's overhyped?
So it's overhyped when you use it as a thought partner because it's essentially an echo chamber. AI is very pleasing. It'll help you clarify what you were thinking, but then you might mistake what comes out of it as a just sort of or objective thing when actually it's really just an echo chamber of your own thoughts. So it's a great tool to help you think about what you're doing. The way we use it at Aytza is a little bit different. We use the AI and the data tools that we have to really build a traceable data set of detailed information. So we have agents that fetch data, agents that verify data, agents that analyze data. And it's all about building a traceable decision base so that you can look at that information and say, okay, objectively, this market or this opportunity is better than the other one, and also make that defensible to your board. So we're using it in a different way than people sometimes think about AI. This isn't just a chat bot. We're actually using it to build robust data sets that then power the decision making.
Now, you've mentioned it already, but on your own podcast, CEO Pajama Time, you've had candid conversations about founder resilience.
Mhm.
How does the emotional weight of what if we need to exit style conversations affect decision making, and how do you help leaders stay clear headed?
It's constantly a juggling act, right? You have to think about what's best for your company at this period of time versus in the future. And that game will always change. The opportunities will change. And so I think, again, really laying it all out, writing it down on paper, thinking about what are the options. Like if you go in this direction or that direction, what happens to your team? What happens to your technology? What are the scenarios? And helping to make sure that you are constantly thinking through those trade-offs so that you can make a good decision for the future. And building that optionality early on will help you have more options of what to decide. So I've talked to a lot of founders who've said, I was talking to my board about raising money and we realized that we weren't going to be able to raise the amount that we wanted. And so then it started to become a question of, okay, how can we make sure this technology that we've innovated finds a home that can help it scale? So it's hard for founders when they exit. Actually, one of the hardest things is figuring out their role afterwards, right? Sometimes they stay with the company to do transition or to even stay longer term, but they're not the founder anymore. They're not the CEO anymore. And so that is a difficult thing for them. But a lot of times they're really trying to think about how do we find a good home for the technology so it can scale. And actually in healthcare, most of the time to achieve real scale, you will want to exit to a bigger company because it's sort of hard to reach scale with as a smaller point solution that just grows. And so a lot of times success is measured by bigger companies adopted this technology. But in terms of the emotional resilience part, it's finding those grounding things. Usually it's people you can talk to, things like journaling. It's really sort of thinking about what is the bigger picture here? What am I trying to achieve with this? And honestly, hopefully people didn't go into this wanting to be a founder for the cool part. One of the, I guess, Michelle Davy said, people think it's glamorous. They want to be a CEO of a startup because it's glamorous, but trust me, it's not, right? And so knowing that you're going into this to innovate something in healthcare and you want to figure out how to bring that technology to the market in the best way possible. And sometimes that means selling it to somebody who can carry it across the finish line.
Crystal ball time. Looking ahead a few years, what's one change in the health tech M&A landscape that most founders you feel are underestimating right now?
It's a good question. So I think most founders, honestly, maybe they don't think of it exactly like this, but there's still this kind of concept of like, oh, you're going to exit. And people think of an exit as like an IPO for some reason. The reality is the vast majority of exits that happen in healthcare are through M&A. That is the exit path. So I think we're going to continue to see more of that. I think we're going to see more of the PE variety as well, where it's right now it's about 5% of them, but we do see upticks in more of that. So as some of the companies that have achieved scale, we'll see more PE roll-ups of those types of companies, and especially maybe taking different types of capabilities and stitching them together. And also some health tech companies that are saying, you know what, that's our strategy. I've talked to a number of folks who've said, that's our strategy. We're going to like buy a lot of different companies and piece them together. So I think we'll see more of this like structured M&A, not just, now we see a lot of like one company buying one other company and it's a little bit piecemeal, but I think we'll see more of this structured M&A as a good exit path.
Finally, and we've covered quite a lot of good advice as it is, but if you could leave every listener with a single piece of advice on specifically exit readiness, what would it be?
Single piece, huh?
Well, it doesn't have to be single piece.
I'll give you a couple things. So number one, think about it earlier than you think you need to, right? Absolutely. Plan it out. You don't have to do it at any point in time, but create that optionality, know who it is, and really focus on what those people want and build those relationships early. Because most exits actually happen, especially the incumbents, with companies that have already worked with the company that they're buying in some shape or form. And so that's really important. The second is to really be clear-eyed on what is the value that you are bringing to the table, and then what do they value and how do you orient around that. And then the other thing to keep in mind, which I'm going to just mention here because I think folks sometimes misread this is the biggest switch that's hard to do. When you're raising money and you're building a startup, you're thinking in like a VC mindset. What I mean by that is it's all forward looking. It's like the potential is, what is the size of this market? How can I go after it? What's my trajectory? What's that hockey stick? When you're exiting, they're looking at what you have already built. And it's backwards looking and saying, I have this many customers, this much revenue, this much product, whatever it is you have. And that is a huge mental shift. And you have to orient yourself around that. I've seen so many potential acquisitions fail because the acquiree is viewing their market potential as their future potential and not the things they've built already. So being very realistic and about what it is you have built and understanding that the acquirer is going to look at the value of that and not the value of what might be built in the future. So those are some of the tips, and hopefully folks can, plan it ahead so that they do a good job of exiting well.
Sari Kaganoff, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.